Let me open with something that usually makes Cold War historians uncomfortable. The obsession with underground shelters, bunkers, and hardened concrete boxes is largely a post-war myth that misses what governments actually relied on when nuclear war felt imminent. During the early Cold War, when the threat was raw, poorly understood, and terrifyingly real, planners knew something uncomfortable. Most civilians would never make it to a purpose-built shelter in time. Roads would clog. Warning times would be short, and purpose-built shelters were rare, expensive, and limited to elites. So instead of betting everything on bunkers, civil defense experts quietly pushed a different strategy, one that was cheaper, faster, and, under many realistic scenarios, more survivable. That trick was shelter adaptation, not shelter construction. If you understand how it worked, it fundamentally changes how you think about survival planning today. What Cold War planners understood about blast and fallout survival is rarely explained correctly. The deadliest effects of a nuclear detonation were not the blast itself for most people outside the immediate radius, but thermal radiation and radioactive fallout in the hours and days afterward. Fallout was the real killer. It drifted, settled, and irradiated anyone exposed without shielding. The critical insight was that you didn't need a bunker carved into bedrock to survive fallout. You needed mass, distance, and time. Earth, concrete, books, water, furniture, anything dense could block radiation if arranged correctly. Distance from windows and exterior walls mattered more than depth underground. Time mattered most of all, because radiation decays rapidly in the first 48 hours. This led to, honestly, the most effective Cold War survival tactic that most people have never practiced: the rapid conversion of ordinary buildings into improvised fallout shelters. Governments actually ran classified and semi-classified studies showing that a well-chosen interior space in a normal structure could outperform a poorly designed backyard bunker. Basements, interior hallways, sub-level parking garages, and even stairwells consistently tested better than those shallow, lightly reinforced shelters dug by amateurs. How this was meant to work in practice is where things get interesting. Civil defense manuals instructed people to identify the core of a building first. That meant the point farthest from exterior walls and roofs, preferably below ground level. In a house, that was usually the basement corner against the earth, not the centre of the room. In apartment blocks, it was interior stairwells or shared basement corridors. Once identified, mass was added. Furniture, bookshelves, filled containers of water, soil in bags, even doors removed from hinges were stacked against walls to increase shielding. This could be done in under an hour, with no special tools. Tests showed radiation exposure could be reduced by over 90% using this method. What made this approach superior to building shelters was speed and realism. Cold War warning times were often measured in minutes, not days. A family caught at work, school, or on the road would never reach a distant shelter. But they could immediately move to a hardened interior space and improve it on the spot. This was the logic behind shelter-in-place decades before the phrase became common. It was not passive hiding. It was active, deliberate modification of existing structures using principles of physics, not brute force construction. You can apply this same thinking today with unsettling ease. Start by evaluating the buildings you already spend time in. At home, identify the lowest interior point with the most surrounding mass. Note how many walls separate it from the outside. Measure how quickly you could move supplies there if needed. Water is critical, not just for drinking, but for shielding. Even plastic containers filled and stacked correctly add meaningful protection. Heavy furniture should be thought of as movable shielding, not decoration. In offices or public buildings, stairwells and underground service corridors remain some of the most survivable spaces, even now. Another Cold War lesson that rarely gets discussed is timing discipline. People died not because shelters failed, but because they left them too early. Radiation levels drop fast, but not instantly. The old civil defense rule was simple. The first 48 hours were sacred. Leaving shelter early to check damage, help neighbours, or retrieve supplies caused unnecessary exposure. The most successful survival models emphasize staying put, managing waste, rationing water, and maintaining calm until radiation dropped to survivable levels. This wasn't cowardice, it was math. There's also a psychological advantage to this method that Cold War planners understood well. Improvised sheltering kept families together and reduced panic. Digging bunkers encourages isolation and false confidence. Adapting existing spaces encourages flexibility and cooperation. During drills, communities that practice conversion rather than evacuation consistently performed better and recovered faster. The real reason this Cold War trick beats shelter building is uncomfortable but important. Most people will never build a perfect shelter, and most shelters will never be tested until it's too late. But every building you already use can become a shield if you understand what actually stops radiation. Survival has always favoured knowledge over hardware. That was true in 1953, and it's true now. If this kind of overlooked history matters to you, if you care about how real people planned for real catastrophes, then you're in the right place. Subscribe to The Prepper Historian. Share this with someone who still thinks survival begins with a shovel, and keep these lessons alive. History doesn't repeat itself, but it does leave instructions.